The common things that we see is shoulder range that either you just can't quite get there, or there's all sorts of hitching and cheating going on. Now, not everybody notices those cheats. I always point them out to people, but they don't necessarily notice those. So what people might notice is that they don't have the shoulder range, or often the common one, if it's the right shoulder and they're the driver, I can't reach into the back seat of my car. Well, it's not, and they're focused on their shoulder, but that actually requires a lot of thoracic rotation in order to be able to do something like that. So
How are the ribs connected to all of these things where the person thought that they only had a surgery at the breast?
right. So I think the ultimate connection is through the fascial system, the myofascial system. And I know you and I have talked about this before, and we both agree with this so strongly, is that the breast cancer treatment really wreaks havoc to the fascial system, right? Through surgical scarring, post-surgical scarring, and radiation is a really big doozy. And that really starts to impact our system from sliding and gliding, but also those ribs that sit below the breast or where the breast used to be. But what I'll often say with ribs is sort of two checks. One is our ribs have to, all of our ribs together with our spine, that whole ring system I talked about, all has to turn together in this sort of symphony. So what I often have well, I'll check with women, but easy way to check is to check what your twist is. So if you put your hands on your shoulders, so that way you're not cranking through your shoulder blades in your shoulders, and you're sitting down so your pelvis is stable. And then check how far can you rotate one way. Think about, and don't force through it. How far can you go without muscling through it? Because if you're muscling through it, guaranteed you're cheating. And how far can you turn the other? Like I'm quite restricted one way. So how far can you go the other way? And then number two is a little bit more complicated, but I often talk about sort of bumpy ribs. And again, this is some of my training with Diane Lee here in Canada. But looking at, again, if we go back to the slinky analogy, okay? Ideally, no one is ideal. So if whoever's watching this, don't panic. But ideally, our ribs, if you will, should be all sort of stacked and lined nicely. Well, that's just not life. What we're often, this starts to happen, right? Where you've got one or two, the slinky's too small, but let's just imagine one or two of those are out to the side. So that rib or that ring is in a turned position, slightly turned. So what we can do ourselves is feel down the line of our armpit and feel down, and oh yeah, I feel one or two ribs that are sticking out a little bit more than the other. And that gives us a hint, if I'm a ring, that ring is in a rotated position or a turned position. So now I'm going to feel for that bumpy rib on the same side that I have some restriction. So I'm using my thumb, feeling up and down those ribs, finding that rib that's a little bit bumpier or maybe a little more tender than the others. And then I'm going to use two parts here. The first part is I'm thinking about creating some space between my ribs like the slinky. And then the second part is using my thumb to very gently turn that rib back a little bit. And then I go into the rotation. And I'm nodding because my rotation should be a little bit better now than it was before I started.